Comrades, I think that May 2013 was a month which requires all socialists to give serious thought to, because there were two really important developments which will undoubtedly contribute to shaping British politics over the next period. The first one is that UKIP made a spectacular electoral breakthrough. The scope of this we have yet to assess in terms of events to come, but I think it's fair to say that we are talking about a breakthrough which is similar, if not exactly the same, as the breakthrough of the SPP in 1981. So that's the first event. And the second occurrence was, of course, the ruthless exploitation by the EDL of the murder of Lee Rigby in Woolwich. And as I want to show, those two events are connected, but they are different, and we have to look at them in different ways. But first, let's deal with the question of UKIP itself. What was the size of their electoral breakthrough? UKIP fielded for the local county council elections 1,700 candidates in May of this year, which is roughly 500 up from what they did in similar elections in 2009. But impressively, from their point of view, they gained 147 councillors on county council elections, up from 8 from 2009. They are now the official opposition party in 3 counties of Britain: Lincolnshire, West Sussex, and Kent. And of course, they also scored 25% in the wards in which they stood. Now, comrades, if those figures were projected into a general election, it would, if the total voting figures were projected into a general election held over the next few months, the pollsters predict that Labour would be on 29%, the Tories on 25%, UKIP on 23%, and the Liberal Democrats on 14%. That indicates the threat that UKIP poses to the Tory party, because of course they can kiss goodbye to any prospect of forming a majority government after the next election. But of course, things are, if you like, from the point of view of the Tories, even worse than that, because it's not fanciful to suggest that the Euro elections next year will produce possibly UKIP coming in first, possibly, but we'll have to see, but possibly around 30-odd%. And under those circumstances, those election results will undoubtedly put the Tory party into massive crisis. It is worthwhile remembering also that this electoral surge of UKIP doesn't come out of the blue. In the last 6 by-elections held since March 2010, the UKIP vote has ranged from 12% in Barnsley in March 2011 to 27% in Eastleigh in February of this year and 24% in South Shields. So in other words, UKIP were on the march electorally before their breakthrough in terms of the county council elections. Now, what we have to do is to really understand where UKIP are and how they fit in to the political jigsaw. And I think the best way of doing this is to recognise that, as I said, UKIP presents a real serious problem for the Tory party. Of course, they do present something of a problem for the Labour Party. So that, for instance, in 2009, pollsters told us that 27% of the UKIP vote had voted Labour, and only 21% of the UKIP vote had formally voted Tory. But something very important happens in 2010. The Lib-Con coalition takes office, they impose an austerity programme, and those figures are dramatically reversed. Now we have UKIP voters, 3% only of which had previously voted Labour, and now we have 37% of UKIP voters who had previously voted Tory. And I think it's important to hold those two contrasts, that contrast in mind, because of course the Labour vote was taken by UKIP before 2010, partly on the anti-immigration rhetoric of the Labour Party, Gordon Brown, British jobs for British workers, etc. Labour were in office, and it was an anti-establishment, anti-EU vote. We need to bear that in mind, because I'm not saying that this won't be repeated in some stage in the future. However, it's also important to remember that the other side of the contrast is backed up by a poll issued a few days ago, which told us that 1/5 of putative Conservative voters, those people who in the past, have thought about voting Conservative, now 1/5 are now seriously considering voting UKIP. And you add to that of a survey of 101 out of 147 UKIP councillors, 21%, a fifth of that, came from people who were previously Tory councillors, and 33% had previously been active Tory party members. And I think that, therefore, what that means for us is that it highlights, of course, there's a whole lot of other defections from the Tory party at council level. The leader of Merton Council, the leader of various other councils have defected to UKIP. This is a drainage of the Tories, which reflects, as I say, a deeper crisis. You see, if you go back to 1931, that was, in very favourable circumstances, the high watermark of the Tory vote historically. They had 55% of the vote. By 2010, that vote had fallen to 35%. And it is worthwhile remembering, it is now over 20 years since the Tory party have gained a parliamentary majority. They did that, it seemed quite like halcyon days actually, when John Major, he seems quite a benign character. Sorry, what am I saying? You get the general idea. I mean, it's over 20 years since Honest John, standing on his post, on his soapbox, popping down, I hope to God I never met him at the Oval, popping down to the Oval to see the cricket. And Lord Ashcroft has a very interesting comment. It's probably the only interesting thing Lord Ashcroft has ever said in his life. But he looked at the 2010 election results, and his conclusion is this, is that since 1992, the Tories have never won more than 10.7 million votes. That's 4 million adrift from where Major was in 1992. But he then analyses that vote, and he says there are 8.5, as he calls it, true blue voters. There is another 2.5, which he describes as the 2010 cohort. You break down that cohort, as Lord Ashcroft did, and you find some very strange things. That 60% of that 2010 cohort, of the 2.5 Tory voters of 2010, support Greenpeace. 40% of them supported Stop the War Coalition and No War in Iraq. And that immediately shows to you what the problem that the Tories face. Because on the one hand, you have the Tory modernisers who have to deal with that cohort, and that's why David Cameron has offered the question of gay marriage, but he has a problem. He also, these are the people who probably don't want to see the funding for the NHS cut. These are the people who are uncomfortable, probably, with reducing taxes for the rich in the age of austerity. On the other hand, you have the true blue Tories who are vehemently, as we've seen, against gay marriage. They are for faster and deeper cuts. They are for curbs on immigration. And of course, they are for the exit from the European Union. Those of you who are political obsessives, like me, watch that thing In the Thick of It. And it's perfectly summed up in that way. You have the true blue Tory minister, what's his name, Peter Manning, who I think hates his spin doctor, a Tory moderniser, certainly more than he hates the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, or any other political organisation. The way he shrinks, the spin doctor can hardly get a sentence out before Manning is sort of grumbling, grousing away. But it perfectly shows the tension. Now, this is an important argument. We have to understand this, because some people could draw the conclusion that the vote for UKIP represented a shift to the right in British politics. I think this is a wrong analysis. What we're seeing is a rearrangement of the votes on the right, but as the Jerry Hicks vote shows, as indeed the fact that the Labour votes in the by-elections since 2010 have remained almost universally what they were at that 2000, in the by-election. They remained what they have been, what they were in the 2010 election. So the Labour vote, and indeed the county council elections for Labour, are almost tell the same story. So we as socialists, and this is an important argument, should say, no, it's not a shift, but not a general shift to the right in British society. It is really a demonstration of the crisis within the Tory party. And this is not just me saying this. Why should you believe me? Let's take a much more relevant commentator, John Rentoul. John Rentoul, who is probably the most Blairite, people can correct, I think he's the political editor of The Independent, isn't he? He's certainly a political commentator. He wrote the biography of Blair. He is a hardline Blairite. And what does this moderate person say? He says, UKIP is the extreme right wing of the Tory party in exile. A party run in the main by self-made businessmen with an agenda to match. And he goes on to say, UKIP would be better known as the UK immigration foam party. This is Rentoul speaking. He says they have an obsession with immigration, which is of course one of the underlying reasons why they are so anti-European. It's not just a question of the bureaucracy, so-called at Strasbourg and so on and so forth. It is the possibility of slamming the doors shut at the channel, which they think is going to be the way in which they're going to control immigration. Rentoul goes on to say, immigration runs through its policy statements like red lettering in seaside rock. The UKIP are proposing, for instance, a 5-year ban on entry into the UK. And of course, YouGov publish a poll which is analysing the UKIP vote in 2013, and they come up with very significant figures. They argue that they found that 76% of those who said they were going to vote UKIP did so on the grounds that UKIP was promising a cut in immigration. That compares with only 59% who are voting UKIP to take Britain out of Europe. There is a constant attack on multiculturalism by UKIP, saying that it is challenging the British way of life, the British heritage, and so on. And of course also an attack on political correctness. Nigel Farage got himself into a bit of a problem because he was trying to counter the charge that it was a racist organisation by saying that the North Croydon candidate in the by-election, one called Winston Mackenzie, who was of Afro-Caribbean origin, shows how multiracial the party was. The only problem was Winston Mackenzie rather blotted his copybook by making a remark that saying allowing gay couples to adopt was, quote, unhealthy. So not really a convincing riposte from him. But if we remember also the fact that they made big play about the, quote, invasion of 29 million Eastern Europeans from Bulgaria and Romania coming to this country. The UKIP Euro MEP, Marta Anderson, actually resigns from the party, and this is what she says. It is very easy to use immigration as a threat to the population of this country because people are losing their jobs and welfare, and the welfare state is being reduced. We are becoming too close to the BNP. Now, I want to return to that question in a minute, but what I'm trying to say is that the real message on the doorstep that is hammered home by UKIP candidates up and down the country, vote UKIP to restrict or possibly end all immigration. But I think that we also have to recognise that there is a wing of UKIP that, a wing, that's an exaggeration. There is a small minority of UKIP that actually do have links with the BNP. So the leader on Lincolnshire County Council, a man called Chris Payne, put this on his Facebook. This was exposed by the Sunday Mirror. And he said this on his Facebook. Go home, you freeloading, benefit-grabbing, resource-sucking, baby-making, non-English speaking, blah, 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 bleep, bleep, bleep. And check those other hairy-faced, sandal-wearing, bomb-making, camel-riding, goat, blank, 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 blank. I'm just repeating how it appeared on Facebook. Raghead, blank, 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 with you. Now, this was a statement which the party, as it says here, did not suspend Councillor Chris Payne, but instead referenced the epidemic of computer hacking sweeping UKIP ranks. Computer hacking is quite relevant, probably. So that is that. There are other councillors. Alex Wood, a councillor in Blackmore Vale, put on his website himself giving a Hitler salute, as well as hiding a knife between his teeth in front of a Union flag. Do people actually vote for these people? But nonetheless, so there is definitely a small connection with a fringe element within, that's probably the best way of describing it, within UKIP. But we do have to be clear that the UKIP can in no way be described as a fascist organisation. We have to be completely clear about this. They are a parliamentary party wedded to the parliamentary road. Nigel Farage's hero is Enoch Powell. Now, whatever else we said about Enoch Powell, we never said he was a fascist. In other words, how do we define fascism? Trotsky gave the best definition. He said fascism is when the ruling class want to take a razor to the working class, to destroy it and its institutions. That is what the BNP want to do, that is what the Nazis in Germany did, that is what Mussolini, etc., etc. So that is fascism. That is not the agenda of UKIP. Certainly they have traces of fascist support within their ranks. But Nigel Farage himself cannot be described in those terms. Just various other aspects of their policies. The policy on global warming, they say that it's not proven. Wind farms are futile. They want to free the UK from dependence on foreign oil or gas. They want to abolish the inheritance tax. They want a 31% flat rate tax for everybody, tax cuts for the rich. This will obviously involve major tax cuts for the rich, scrapping of the NI employer contribution, and they want to spend an extra 40% on defence. So there you have. Sorry, I'll just throw that in. I do actually find it quite hard to get my head around. This is a serious policy. This is a serious policy, comrades. And so this is what they are making the appeal, essentially, to that, as Rentoul describes, the Tory party, the disaffected wing of the Tory party. You know, they have general quotes. You know, life must mean life if you're sent to jail, support for grammar schools, and they want a countrywide referendum on the hunting ban. Just a couple of other quotes to give you a flavour of this. On LGBT ranks, the UKIP mayoral candidate said he would not, the mayoral candidate for London, he wouldn't be campaigning in Camden because there were too many gays. Protesting, he was not homophobic, but in public, let's live a proper moral life. Jeffrey Bloom, this is a good one, who is the MEP 2004, he was bizarrely re-elected in 2009, said...
It's Godfrey, can you that's fine.
Thank you, comrade. That's absolutely right. I like to be kept up to the mark about these questions. And he said, no self-respecting small businessman with a brain would ever employ a lady of childbearing age. He goes on to say, I'm here to represent Yorkshire women who always have dinner on the table when you get home. I'm going on to the European Women's Committee to promote women's rights. And the other thing I think that we have to be clear about, Nigel Farage is very adept at presenting himself as a man of the people. The man in the pub, with the pint of beer, having a quick fag. Actually, I always envy him when he's having a fag. I gave up smoking a good time ago now, but when I see him smoking, I do have a craving for a cigarette. But anyway, you see, Nigel Farage is not at all an outsider. He was educated at one of the poshest public schools, certainly in London, Dulwich College. He made his money as a commodity broker in metals. He was found to have an offshore tax-free fund. So he's certainly not an outsider. He doesn't live up to the image of the man in the pub that he would like to present. The treasurer of UKIP, Stuart Wheeler, went to Eton College, is one of the 2,000 most rich men in the country on the Sunday Times rich list, and with a windfall of the sale of his shares, buys a nice little castle in Kent worth 7.3 million. Hardly representative of the sort of people that they say and they want to represent. And Paul Sykes, of course, another funder of the Tory party, who has the albatross around his neck of building Meadowhall shopping centre in Sheffield. So that is the nature of UKIP. But what I want to do now is to put that in the wider context of European politics. And of course, what I really want to draw your attention to is that right-wing politics in Europe is in a state of flux. And we have to locate UKIP within this spectrum. Roughly we can divide the right-wing political parties in Europe into 4 categories. The first one is the hardcore Hitler-loving fascists, the nasty elements from Jobbik in Hungary and of course Golden Dawn in Greece. Secondly, there are the slick-suited Euro-fascists, so to speak, represented by Marine Le Pen, with that hideously high vote of 18% in the last presidential election. Thirdly, we have the street-fighting people of the EDL, the Eastern European boot boys. These are people who want to go on to the streets. And finally, and this is where UKIP fit in, they are a populist electoral right. The category is the populist electoral right-wing parties that make that nativist, anti-foreigner and racist appeal around the targeting of Muslims and immigrants. And of course, the European equivalent of UKIP are the Party for Freedom of Geert Wilders in Holland, Italy's Northern League, Umberto Bossi, who organised that attack on the Romas and so on, that shocking attack in Northern Italy a few months ago, the Swiss People's Party. Now, of course, there's not an absolute congruence here between UKIP and Geert Wilders. So Geert Wilders says that he is defending Dutch liberal values, particularly around gay rights and so on, and therefore that is why he is Islamophobic. Nigel Farage, on the other hand, is both Islamophobic and homophobic. So there's not a complete congruence here. And in Europe, although I don't think this is going to happen in Britain, in Europe, Geert Wilders has been very careful to maintain a distance from the Front National. But with the Euro elections coming up, Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders have met and they are discussing a common front for the Euro elections. Nigel Farage is not going to enter into that because, as I've said, in my view, he's not a fascist. He doesn't mind flirting with fascists, but it is really interesting. Nigel Farage, usually a very loquacious politician, seizing every bit of the media, actually we heard not a dicky bird from him around murders. Why? Because he didn't want to get too close to the EDL. He's after scooping up that right-wing Tory vote, and he doesn't want to frighten them, and his own inclinations remain in terms of the parliamentary role. Now, what we have to say, therefore, is that UKIP represents, in that 4th category, really represent a major, formidable challenge in exactly the same way as Enoch Powell presented socialists with a challenge in the late 1960s. And you see, Enoch Powell created the conditions whereby the National Front could grow. Enoch Powell created the conditions whereby the National Front in the elections of 1977 in London, the GLC elections, could gain 119,000 votes. in 35 of the London constituencies, they knocked the Liberal Party into fourth place. And of course, the real damage that Enoch Powell did, that process was repeated, of course, around 2010 and the rise of the BNP, as the mainstream parties slipped into anti-immigration rhetoric. You remember the disgusting Gordon Brown, British jobs for British workers, etc., etc. So the BNP took hold of it. So what we have to say about UKIP is that what they are doing is systematically dragging the mainstream parties to the right. That's why David Cameron went to Munich to attack multiculturalism, because he wants to send a signal to the true blue Tories, the Tory party in exile. That's why that snivelling little toad, Leo Fox, earlier on this week came out with a statement which says, I want to take Britain out of the EU to slam the immigration doors shut. And of course, Labour have also succumbed to this drift to the right on immigration. If I hear John Crumps coming on, or see John Crumps, Labour's guru, allegedly, coming on television saying, Labour got it wrong over immigration, we have to, what a bloody, that's another coded way in which Labour are giving in to the pressure from UKIP. So what is our response? Our response, I think, has to be very, very focused. Number one, the launch of the campaign, Stand Up to UKIP, which is not the UAF, by the way. This is stand up to the racists, stand up to the bigots at UKIP. This campaign is important and has to be built up and down the country. The comrades in Edinburgh and in Brighton set us a marvellous example. Wasn't it wonderful to turn the... to turn the television on and to see Nigel Farage scuttling around and so on and so forth. And, I should declare an interest here. Sussex university students, to whom I have some relationship, did also extremely well down in Sussex, getting something like 300 people on the demonstration. So this is, so we're going to demonstrate against Farage. We're going to point out the racist nature of UKIP, and we're going to say that they need to be exposed by demonstrations, placards, and so on and so forth. On the whole, I think we are not going to break up their meetings, but we are going to put an alternative point of view. And we don't break up their meetings because they're not fascists, but people might want to come back to that. Secondly, I think that the role of UAF is equally important, not so much obvious, not at all actually against UKIP directly, but in terms of what UKIP spawns to their right, the EDL, etc., etc. And I just think, comrades, there is a lot of debate inside the party at the moment. But I think we all have to be really clear the debt of gratitude we owe to the leadership of UAF over the last 2 years in terms of ensuring. And if for no other reason, it makes me enormously proud to be in an organisation that is so centrally linked to UAF. And the final strand, if you like, of the resistance against UAF and indeed the EDL is the question of building the massive fight against austerity. And the argument is simple, comrades, that for every council house you can get built, for every school place you can save, for every bedroom tax eviction you can avoid, you undercut both the racists and the fascists. The demonstration on the 29th of September is symbolic of the way in which we're going to deal not only with the scum of the EDL, but we're going to also undercut the appeal of UKIP.
My name is Jeff Herford. I'm Secretary of the Out Against Fascism in Wales. I very much agree with all the points that Paul made about the nature of UKIP. It is the first right-wing populist organisation that we actually had in this country. Hitherto, they've largely formed, a bit of the Tory party, and as Paul says, coming out of that. I will actually explore the dangers, the specific dangers, and what sort of UAF and so forth should be doing about it. I mean, an important danger, but probably the least of them, is that they will act as a storehouse for that near million votes that used to go to the BNP and largely won't be going to the BNP anymore because of the work that we've been doing. That's a very large number of votes to add to the kind of swings that we've already sort of seen happening. But worse than that, they're likely to foster racism and Islamophobia. Their policies on immigration are very little different from those of the BNP. Probably not very significant to the sort of people who want to see more Islamophobia, more racism. And they're likely, I would think, therefore, to switch their votes and increase, through their publicity, the amount of Islamophobia that there is. In Newport, a couple of weeks ago, there was a desecration of Muslim graves with swastikas put on them. What was also put on them was BNP, NF and UKIP. You would not have seen UKIP on that kind of desecration, even 6 months ago. If they do increase racism, the other danger, and this is what Nick Griffin has already written about, what he's hoping for, is that it will act as a conveyor belt to the next fascist party that actually rises. And if you look at France, for example, where they have had a big history of right-wing populism, they've had a big of populism from Boulanger to Poujade that provided a base for things like Le Pen to build. What it seems to me that UAF needs to be doing is defending migrants, defending multiculturalism, defending, opposing racism and Islamophobia. And I believe we can actually carry the UAF base into that fight. I'm slightly sceptical whether I want to set up another organisation in Wales because UAF is very successful there, it's very dominant there, we have massive support from the trade unions. To go through the process of another organisation, it may be that it needs to operate under a different banner at times. But a whole organisation would seem to me to be adding unnecessarily, to work that we're already doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm from the northwest, and we are in the very unenviable position in the northwest. We have Nick Griffin as our Euro MP. And on top of that, in Morecambe, which many of you will know is a seaside resort in the northwest, it's not rich, it's not a particularly Tory area. We also had a very large UKIP vote just in the last election. So we've got UKIP and the BNP to fight against and to get rid of. And really it's more of a question or more of a seeking advice. The comrade from Wales just said he's unsure of having yet another campaign. We've already started doing a lot of work under the UAF Griffin Must Go campaign in Morecambe, and we're meeting with a lot of positive response from that. So we're working really hard now to make sure that Griffin does not get re-elected. But I think we do face the possibility of not having a BNP Euro MP, but of ending up with a UKIP Euro MP if they stand. So obviously we need to campaign against that, but do we do it as two separate campaigns? Do we do it all under the UAF? It's just a question of tactics that I'd like some advice on. Thanks. The next speaker.
I'll leave that one to Wayman. There's a few points that Paul made about the makeup of UKIP, which does say does tell its tale. Also, it's a telling point, which one not really talked about. Maybe we should use this in a campaign to get rid of Griffin, hopefully next year. And Nick Griffin, amongst other things, tried to infiltrate in the early days when Dr. Alan Sked was running UKIP. Nick Griffin tried to infiltrate it for his own nefarious reasons. But also, as well, you think about some of the people who run UKIP, some people remember him, a man called Neil Hamilton with his equally horrible wife, Christine Hamilton. Now, the brown envelope man, cash for questions. This man, wait for it, is the Wiltshire UKIP treasurer. Right? You can make it up. Moreover, they're up for doing deals at a local level electorally with the ex-BNP fascists, the English Democrats. Right? Again, this should be brought out a bit more, I think. Robert Kilroy-Silk, some people remember him, Paul remember him, he was one of the MPs about the Anti-Nazi League the first time round in Knowlton North. Robert Kilroy-Silk was a UKIP official before he went off to split Veritas, and all he took with him from that was his brown Pervitan ascension. Now, when you think about it, it is, I agree with the analysis Paul's put forward, but there is worrying signs, a place like Rotherham, and I agree about the protest votes around Rotherham, people know Rotherham, if you don't. Debbie's horrifically treated by the Tories over the years. Next Steel Town, there's very little there in Rotherham now. A bloody MP who's corrupt and out on his uppers, Dennis McShane. They got 21% in Rotherham last year. But you talk to some of the people who live there, and they're just furious, everything. Furious with official politics and so on. It's not a surprise. What's more slightly worrying is that in London, the outskirts of London, Haven, they got the first council seat, right? BNP, Tories, now it's UKIP. And that won't stay forever and a day. But I think the thing is that these people can be exposed. We did it at UAF, in our own little way, along with Searchlight, when they had links with people in Boston and Lincolnshire, British Jobs for British Workers, remember, Lindsay Oil. It's not surprising there's people in UKIP stirring it, and the EDL. We exposed the links between the EDL organiser and the immigration demo and UKIP. When it came out in the press took it up. Oh, UKIP, ever so respectable, everybody. Edged away. Now it's an uphill battle in some respects, in other respects it ain't. And I'll leave it for other people to talk about the stand-up campaign. I think it'll be a very good campaign, set up UKIP in a short basis of time, because people are fucking angry with UKIP.
Hey guys, my name is Lois, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what some of the people have said around, you know, forming another organisation, and that's going to be a difficult thing to do. I think you're right, like it is difficult, and we do need to look at how we're forming these united fronts and how we contribute into building them and making them democratic. I think it is important what Paul was saying about that, the fact that it's not a fascist organisation, and we need to make that clarification, because otherwise we run into problems in the future. One of the important issues with fascism that we talk about is no platform for fascists. But we don't talk about no platform for people we don't agree with. And that came up sharply last year in the student movement, when there was an argument from some people on the left that we should have no platform for George Galloway, on the basis of his rape apology, no platform for rape apologists. And actually the students in the Socialist Workers' Party put forward a hard argument that they said, we don't agree with him, but that is not why we shouldn't ask for a no platform. And I think that if we then try and deal with UKIP in a similar way, it then will create a problem for us in the future. But that does mean that we have to, as I said at the start, we do need to be looking at how we can make these organisations something that's both broad but also encapsulates the young people, and we do need to go back and look at how we do that. So I think that's what I'm doing. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Duncan Smith from Edinburgh. I was one of those people who gave Farage a hard time. I'm going to say a bit about that, but also my question is, how far do we push these people compared with how we would treat the BNP? We've had some discussion about that. I mean, we gave Farage a very, very hard time. Within about 2 hours' notice, there were over 100 people gathered outside the pub in the High Street in Edinburgh, where he was going to give a press conference. Now, he called a national press conference. Can you imagine how embarrassing it was when there were 100 people outside, not letting him speak? He came out of the pub, lovely sunny day, and here these 100 protesters there calling him a homophobe and a racist in front of the full Scottish press. He didn't like that. a lot of people in the establishment in Scotland didn't like it either because they said we were anti-English. They said that we were racist and so on, which wasn't true, of course. There were people there who are pro the yes vote for independence, but they weren't anti-English. All the chants were, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, immigration is not the reason for unemployment, for poor housing and all the rest. That was the focus of the protest against Farage. So I say my question is, you know, we pushed him pretty hard. He jumped in a taxi, he surrounded the taxi driver told him to get lost. He had to get out of the taxi, back to the pub. He had to be escorted in a police van, even a car. A black Mariah had to come for him and he jumped into that to escape. Now, we pushed him pretty hard. It's almost like we would do for the BNP. Almost. So my question is, how far do we push this? We came pretty much close to giving him no platform. You know, so my question's around that kind of discussion.
Thanks for an excellent talk, Paul. I want to start off by saying that the battle against UKIP, we have to understand the context which Paul explained. UKIP as part of that right-wing populist trend that's developing inside this country at the moment. And one of the things that we have to look at is I don't know if people noticed it, the Southampton by-election that took place where UKIP didn't win, they came second, but they got 27.4% of the vote, and the same thing that happened inside Rotherham. In other words, and why this is important is that the people that voted for them, a lot of the people that voted for them included large numbers of Labour voters actually. In a place like South Shields, this is happening. Originally, when we went to Labour and said we should stand up against UKIP, they actually turned around and said UKIP's quite good for us because they'll split the Tory vote. That's excellent. And actually what they didn't realise was what was going on was that the UKIP is a respectable face of racism. That when they come on television, they encourage it, and make it respectable. They're not a fascist party. The last speaker got up and said, I'm absolutely against, I'll tell you what I am for. I am for making sure that we confront the fascists everywhere they go. But I am against breaking up UKIP meetings. I'm against breaking them up in the same way because they're not fascist. In the sense they don't have the same way in terms of marching down the street, but they do have a particular effect. In Dudley, when people might have noticed the EDL had a demonstration of 3,000 people against the building of a mosque there. Who called the first demonstration? It was UKIP actually. UKIP councillor called the first demonstration and then withdrew. But he made that space possible for the fascists then to begin to build. What's our relationship to stand up to UKIP? UKIP is mainly an electoral party. That means we're going to need leaflets, stickers, things that put the argument about what they want. They want 7 aircraft carriers in Britain. I don't know, £48 billion a piece, a flat rate tax. You know, we can go through those arguments and actually expose UKIP. I think it's important that we make that distinction in terms of saying we're not launching the same form of United Front as we did around. It's much more like when, I don't know if you remember the multiculturalism campaign, when that multiculturalism was attacked, that form of campaign that takes place in terms of that. Undoubtedly, it's actually right to demonstrate against them as he was right to demonstrate against Powell. When Powell used to go places, we used to demonstrate against him, but it's not the same as treating him the same as a fascist. Why is this important? I'll tell you why it's important is because when we say we have to confront the fascists, and why we have to stop them because they're a danger in terms of trying to smash the whole of democracy. It means that we can unite people behind us on that basis because we identify them as that danger. We need to expose UKIP for when they stand. They're a group of bankers, they're a group of millionaires. That's what UKIP stand for. We have to bring out some of the class questions that are brought up.
Can you start, please? As well
as those things. Now, it's not easy. Now, a lot of people from UAF will be involved in this campaign. But we shouldn't treat them the same way as we treat the fascists. There's lots of things we can find out about UKIP stands. And finally, I got a message from Nigel Farage in our office, or whatever it is. He says, I don't like the bad PR you keep giving us. Right? I want to say, we should give him more bad PR. We should make it impossible for him to stand up and say, I'm the kind of bloke that you should have a drink with. There's no way we'd buy him a drink, give him a drink, unless it was arsenic. That counteracts the kind of thing I'm saying before. I'm going to stop. But that's the basis why we stop using it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly talk about an experience I had a few years ago when we were campaigning in Barking and Dagenham, again when Nick Griffin was standing, and we were canvassing around Barking and Dagenham, knocking on doors and trying to encourage people not to vote for the BNP. And it was with Unite Against Fascism. We were very clear that our argument was vote for anybody but the BNP. And at one point, I mean, most people here in the particular area I was in were people who were sort of disaffected Labour voters, but who were able to be encouraged that, you know, they had to come out and vote in order to stop the BNP getting in, and that there was a real danger of them getting in. But I did come across one person who was sort of winning the argument about the BNP, and she was saying, oh yeah, I have been thinking about it, I was sort of thinking of voting for UKIP actually. And this is at a time when they didn't have nearly as much of the sort of support that they've got at the moment, and also, you know, we didn't have any sort of campaign around what UKIP were and all that sort of thing. So we sort of, you know, tried to sort of have the arguments about immigration and the rest of it, but I think that situation would have been much easier to be in if we had the sort of campaign that we're talking about, having a stand up to UKIP campaign. And I just wanted to quickly touch on what people have sort of said about you know, setting up another campaign. Obviously it is a daunting prospect, you know, it's already hard enough to, you know, get enough resources to do the sort of work we need to do around UAF. But what I wanted to say was, I think that actually will make our work harder in UAF if we don't have a campaign around UKIP like the one that we're talking about having. And I'm really pleased that people sort of clarified what the sort of difference is in the campaign, because that was going to be my question, was you know, what is the sort of nature of this campaign going to be? Because obviously I know that it has to be qualitatively different to how we fight fascists. And I'm pleased that people sort of answered that question. This is going to be a campaign of exposure, and I think that, you know, I don't know if people saw that poll recently about sort of like Britons are wrong about almost everything, and it was sort of, I think it was in the Independent or something, sort of talking about the ideas that people have, and like how way of the mark people are about the level of immigration in the country and stuff. And actually I think it's high time really that we have a real diverse, broad, vibrant campaign sort of exposing the lies about immigration, exposing UKIP, and I'll just leave it there.
And after you.
Hello, comrades. Keith Cargan, Republic of Ireland for the last nearly 20 years, but keep closely interested here. We've had in the Republic a large immigration of people from Eastern Europe, and our unemployment rate is about 14%. It hasn't got the overtones of homophobia because we have actually got quite a progressive attitude. But in terms of racism, it's starting to creep in slowly. You see little bits in newspapers and letters. It's subtle. I'm interested in what you're doing here, particularly because obviously I used to live here. And we're talking about East Anglia, where I used to work, where the Nigel Farage and his gang made a big sway of going into East Anglia with a largely white population and trying to use it as a base. So I have an interest in what you're doing. I would say to you, from the outside, propaganda is totally important, whether it's in your union branch meeting, whether it's on the street, whether it's in your social groups. You need the propaganda to actually counteract what Farage is up to. So, first and foremost, that is the problem. We have got to realise how we're going to organise it. I know it's hard work, but we had problems with power in the 60s. As you can probably see, I've retired technically, but there you are. We're still trying to doing a bit. And all the way through the 60s, 70s, the 80s, and the 90s till I left, we were successful in campaigns. Don't let us falter on this one. We've got to get it right. We need to learn what you're doing because we need to know what problems we're facing in the Republic. But this is a serious problem you've got here. Good luck, comrades, all the best. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question really. I mean, you talked, Paul, about
the different formations on the right, including the fascists and so on. But in terms of sort of like the line between UKIP and the BNP, isn't the line more blurred than you perhaps suggest? Simply on the basis that we've got ex-BNP members, or so they say ex-BNP members, who actually sort of like are UKIP councillors and so on and so forth. So I just wanted clarification on that one, because I think that in terms of targeting UKIP, I think we need to tackle this point in terms of any campaign, in terms of targeting UKIP and the sort of racist thought they perpetrate.
I will touch on the point, the last one I just made actually. I want to be very clear, one of the very important reasons that we don't treat UKIP as fascist, and we need to make sure we differentiate between them, and we need to make sure that UAF stays as a campaign focused on fighting fascism, is that we still have fascists to fight. People should not kid themselves, right? After Woolwich, the EDL a surge, it got huge confidence from that. We've got a situation where there are repeated attacks on mosques at the moment. They're happening 2 or 3 times a week as far as I can see. Some of those are very serious, they're no bomb threats, they're petrol bombs, they're things like that. There are real fascists out there. We will need to unite against fascism to be able to confront those fascists and deal with those in the way that we have been doing. We don't want to blur those lines, because if we start blurring them, then we can't argue with people what it is about the BNP, what it is about the EDL, what it is about the street fighters that we have to tackle. So we do have to be clear that there is a difference between a horrible, nasty right-wing but parliamentary party and the fascists on the streets who would smash up Parliament, to be honest, who would smash up civil society, who would destroy working class organisations, who would send us to concentration camps. That is not actually what UKIP is. Nor is UKIP, to be honest. UKIP isn't a sort of, it doesn't have a kind of white power kind of racism, right? It's not trying to cement its troops in the way that the Nazis used racism as an ideology to do that. It's much more that scapegoating thing, right? These are Tories, these are businessmen, these are city boys. They use racism the way the Tories do, actually, to divide and rule, and they also use it as a big vote winner. Racism is UKIP's populism card. It's its thing to say, yeah, we're the man on the street, we understand you, we know what's going wrong, it's those people. You know, that's what they're doing, they're whipping it up. We need to use the Stand Up to UKIP campaign, we need the leaflets, we need the stickers, we need to expose them for what they are, and we also, and I think this is the job of socialists in particular, we also need to undercut their lies on immigration. We need to take up those arguments inside the working class. We cannot have a situation where people from Bulgaria and Romania are being scapegoated for austerity and the economic crisis. That actually requires us to do 3 things. It requires us to build UAF against the fascists. It requires us to organise using Stand Up to UKIP to expose them wherever they are, and to spread the argument in workplaces and stuff. And it requires socialists to take on much harder arguments, to say that immigrants are welcome here, to say that we all stand together, black, white, immigrant, born here, doesn't matter. There's an excellent socialist work to handle on immigration, and I think people should use that as well. So 3 things to do.
Thank you.
A couple of things. I mean, one of the things which came up when we had an anti-austerity rally was that actually the attacks which UKIP candidates have actually been making on the disabled, which they're actually doing quite horrifically during the council elections, making comments about disabled people being unworthy of life, etc. And I think it's very, very clear they're actually not getting this through fascist politics, but this is the politics of the attacks on the disabled through Tory policies, through the Daily Mail and the Express. But one experience we had in Portsmouth, I'm sure loads of people know this, you have a petition in the High Street against the NHS or whatever, and people come up and sign that, which says to work on the top, and then walk away and say, we're voting UKIP. And for a lot of people, because we haven't actually had a clear way of arguing against UKIP, for a lot of people, supporting UKIP is a kind of none of the above candidate, because they're so sick of mainstream politicians. And I think there's been a difficulty of actually how we do that. And when we actually see the whole John Prudhoe's Blue Labour thing, I think what Wayne touched on it about the Labour Party, people thinking, this is great, it's going to split the right-wing vote. What you actually see, if it's not challenged is that it's going to shift racism right back into the centre, and that everything's going to shift into a very, very racist direction. I think it's very, very important that we actually have stand up to UKIP, because I actually found it very difficult actually being called to speak and actually the local disabled group say something about UKIP are doing, and as local organiser for UAF, I had to do almost a disclaimer, you know, I know UKIP aren't a fascist organisation, and I think this has actually disempowered us, not actually having a separate umbrella group. Yeah, and I think that's why it's very important we do have this umbrella group for clarity.
Just sort of briefly reiterating that UKIP doesn't represent the fact that society as a whole has suddenly shifted well to the right. It doesn't mean everyone's suddenly a racist and things. But they can play a role in dragging mainstream politics to the right if they're not stood up to. And I think, you know, people like John Cruddas play a particularly toxic role, but there's a much broader thing, I think, of people in the Labour movement who look at UKIP and think it means suddenly everyone's against immigration and therefore we have to be as well. I mean, I was really alarmed in the European elections last time around when sections of the left and the union movement stood under the banner of No to EU, Yes to Democracy. Now, I am against the EU, it's a boss's club, but was that really the biggest issue at the time? Well, no, it was trying to steal UKIP's clothes. And you know, some, I think it's a limited problem, but there are places where unions are using the slogan of, quite toxic slogan of against social dumping, which is, I think, is a phrase we should never allow to be used, referring to migrant workers. And you know, a lot of examples, I've got to be brief, but the accommodating to the arguments about immigration just feeds them, just feeds the idea that Labour goes along with it. And whatever else we're campaigning on, be it the bedroom tax, be it against the cuts, be it the strikes, we also have to make sure we always are standing up to the attacks on migrant workers and on Muslims and setting that precedent, really, is laying down that line.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, comrades, for a really wide-ranging and thoughtful discussion. And I think that, you know, we need to recognise that there are few places in this country where a discussion of this quality could take place. And I think we all need to be very proud that this is the Socialist Workers' Party that provides this essential forum where we're trying to hammer out the tactics about how we confront a real problem. Let me just sum up with a confession. At one level, I find it hard to take Nigel Farage seriously because I have that image of 2010 where he's emerging bum first from the wreckage of the aeroplane going down. And somehow, whenever he comes on the television, that image springs into my mind. But the other thing is that I haven't seen it myself, but people say there's something on YouTube where apparently Farage went to Bulgaria, I think it was, saying, you know, warning that 29 million people are coming into this country. And he was interviewing Bulgarians, and he was very put off by the fact that the Bulgarians were extremely pleasant to him, offered to buy him drinks, coffee, and so on and so forth. And then he said, when are you coming to this country? And he was met with total lack of comprehension. And he said, why on earth should we want to come to your country? And he said, don't we want to come for the welfare state? But the weather, they said. We couldn't possibly. I haven't seen the video, but I think that's a rough summary of what it's like. But look, comrades, at another level, this is, as I hope we've discussed adequately today, this is a very serious challenge. And for those comrades who raise the question of the Stand Up to UKIP campaign and the separation with the UAF campaign, I think we have to project ourselves into Britain in 2014, where UKIP are probably going to be better funded than the Tory party when they go into the Euro elections. It means that every household in the country is going to be leafleted, they will have television adverts and party politicals and so on and so forth. In other words, the country is, if I can use that term, is going to be swamped by anti-immigrant literature on a huge scale. And therefore, I think events dictate the setting up of another campaign. And it's going to be a campaign that but itself is going to have to be highly funded. We need money to release, I would have thought, millions of leaflets to counter these people. And think, comrades, what is the message of those leaflets? It's not going to be the same message as comes out of UAF. With UAF, we are making the main argument that the modern fascists today have a direct link with the Nazis of the 1930s. They want to set up concentration camps, etc., etc. And they have an entirely different perspective from UKIP. The message that the leaflets from Stand Up to UKIP campaign are going to have to take full on the question of immigration. We're going to have to take that on, but we're also going to have to say that UKIP are the right wing of the Tory party. Their argument with the Tory party is that the cuts have not gone deep enough, that there is too much taxation of the rich, that the question of defence needs to be increased by 50%. Think what that would mean to the welfare state. In other words, we have to make a class appeal, if you like, in terms of saying you're pissed off with the system, austerity is wrecking your lives, but UKIP wants to deepen that process. Now that's an entirely different message. And it seems to me, therefore, that we need to take the campaign very, very seriously. And think too that there will be Labour MPs, trade union leaders who give lukewarm support to UAF, but for electoral reasons will want to get much more involved in the Stand Up to UKIP campaign. And I think it's incumbent upon us now to lay the basis for getting that campaign together, because come next year it'll be absolutely vital. The final thing is this, comrades. It's quite easy, isn't it, to compartmentalise our activity. But I cannot stress the importance of that third response we have to UKIP. And that is the fight against austerity. Remember, many people will be attracted to UKIP because of the frustration with the system. And we need to recognise we need a socialist thread, an anti-austerity thread in our appeal to try to undercut those people. I believe that the SWP is uniquely placed to offer a lead, not just to the hard left, but to a much wider proportion of people. And I believe it's a challenge that we're well able to meet and overcome.